Lean Forum. The forum is a collection of people, business people and people in business who are actively engaged in Lean and actively want to work together to ensure we all move forward. We're part of Lean Business Ireland, and I would encourage you all to go on to leanbusinessireland.ie and you can see all of our events, but equally what's happening across the country in terms of Lean. Today we're going to have a discussion with a member of ours, Joe Hearn, who is the CEO of the Leading Edge Group. And unfortunately, due to circumstances a little bit beyond our control, Pat Cullinan was meant to be with us, and unfortunately he can't. But Joe is here with us, and Joe's colleague, Anand Nicodemus, who is a senior transformation consultant with the Leading Edge Group and has been for quite a number of years. And both gentlemen will be telling us or drawing a parallel between how Toyota responded to the 2003 energy crisis and how we here in Ireland as business people can respond to the COVID-19. How are you, Joe?
I'm good, Máiréad. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Joe, I know you've been in business quite a while, and I know you deal with some very significant clients here here in Ireland. Can you tell me what you're seeing in terms of how people are responding to COVID-19?
Yes, Máiréad. And by the way, I'm a much older version than Pat Cullinan, so I apologise that Pat couldn't make it. But I think most companies at this stage have been through the initial shock of COVID-19. And I think for those companies in the eye of the storm, the very first issue was dealing with staffing issues. Whether they organised temporary layoffs, short-term working, whether they implemented the government wage subsidy scheme after many iterations and changes in criteria by the revenue, reduction in salaries, and so on. So I think most of those issues now have been resolved. So to me, from a COVID-19 perspective, most companies have now reached the end of stage one. And by the way, what I have noticed though with some of our clients was that some core people or key people that they have in their business, they kept those people on under their full normal working conditions. They didn't put them under any funding scheme. And I suppose they did that, talking to them was basically because of loyalty. They wanted to retain their loyalty and I suppose the relationship that they built up with some of their core employees over many, many years. So I suppose then for those people, a lot of those smaller companies, again, before I move on to the bigger organizations, their next issue at the start of stage two is working capital. And they have issues in relation to funding and financing working capital. And they're going, a lot of these companies have a lot of stock, have a lot of inventory, and because of the social distancing and because of them temporarily being out of business or having very little business, obviously they have a lot of cash tied up in stock and in inventory. And then you have other organizations who have a huge pipeline. Two particular clients that we have a huge pipeline of sales, but because of the lockdown, they can't deliver that solution. So they're worried about not having the right inventory or having the right quantity of volume of inventory. So again, they've got immediate issues in relation to working capital. So they've been working through microfinancing options such as Strategic Cooperation, Banking Corporation of Ireland, for example. And in fairness to the LEOs across the country, the LEOs have, as you probably know, have a LEO business continuity voucher. And again, they're using that voucher to get supports to help in the application process for that microfunding. So they were from the smaller companies. They've been the two major issues. I suppose then you move on to the bigger companies and say some of the transform companies that we're working with. They've continued to transform their businesses, but at a much, much slower pace. But however, I think there's been a shift, and I think it's only been in the last 7 to 10 days where a lot of these bigger companies that are running lean transformation programs, I think have now realized that in reality, this situation, or moving back to what some people call the new norm, can be out till September, October timeframe, or even longer. So I think there is now a realization in these larger organizations that they need to use the existing tools and technologies that they have in order to continue with their transforms. So that is definitely, but that's a pretty recent development. So it's a good development in that companies are now realizing they have to tackle the issues and problems and the challenges and the opportunities that they've had. But I suppose the single biggest requirement from these larger organizations has been, and one of the biggest bugbears that they've had, has been how the hell to manage the remote teams. Now that really seems to that has come up so often with a lot of the companies that we have dealt with, and also you see it on social media. And again, in fairness to the Enterprise Ireland and the IDA, they've come up with the Lean Business Continuity Voucher, as you know. And again, companies are using that to pilot virtual workplace designs, and also helping them to develop a kind of a strategy and a roadmap for how to manage remote teams going into the future and how to roll that out across their businesses. So that is a key, I suppose, area of concern across all groupings and across all businesses. And then there's an area associated with that, Máiréad, which is around assessment profiling. And again, some people are extroverted, some people introverted, and not everybody can actually, I suppose, feel at ease in relation to remote working. So what companies are now doing is they're looking at assessment profiling, both for the individual team members and also for those people that are managing and communicating with those teams. So two particular companies are using an assessment tool called it's the high potential. I have it here somewhere, but it's a high potential trait indicator, which measures 6 traits, and that indicates the personality and actually also the work performance of individuals. And then, as I said, they're also using personality profiling for those that are managing virtual teams, and I suppose helping them to understand what's the best practices in relation to managing teams, and also, of course, utilizing their own personal communication preferences. So then finally, with the big multinationals that have all the financial muscle and have monies to invest in this current environment, they have moved extraordinarily fast from offering virtual, or from offering, say, classroom, from a training perspective, from classroom training, and very, very much and very seamlessly, especially internationally, and Anand would back me up on this, into live web-based training. And it's changed to such an extent that I mean, our belief will be is that is a behavior that will be set, and a lot of those behavioral shifts will stay with us for the foreseeable future. We do a lot of classroom training, especially in Canada and Australia. And our feeling now is that any new classroom training events, it will be difficult to see any, even though we could be wrong, but that's the criteria that we've set. It'd be very difficult to see how they will happen in the foreseeable future, even going on until 2021. So live web-based training companies are beginning to look at that seriously, and also like I suppose the cost impact, and also obviously the geographical people from different geographical locations.
You know, Joe, that's great. That's great to hear, because you know it's testament of how you guys are transforming as a company. Like you said, all companies across the country, be they small or large, are starting to become aware of the situation they're currently in and adapting to it, and using those transformational tools to I suppose catapult us into a positive new norm, a new future. And I suppose, and hence the basis of today's discussion, and Anand, I'm going to bring you in at that point, if that's okay. I just would love to explore, we're here in a very different world than what it was even in 2003. For some of us, that doesn't seem like very long ago, but it is quite a while ago. I suppose, how did the energy crisis of that time hit Toyota? How did they respond? And how do they transform or use the transformational tools to catapult themselves into the new norm?
Right. Thanks, Máiréad. And I'm going to first start by just sort of echoing some of the things that Joe mentioned. So Joe mentioned virtual workplace, managing teams, live web-based training. All of these, I think, are primarily being driven by the fact that people they have to be physically distanced, they cannot meet. So these are the new realities which, to his point, may continue to persist. We've seen that every crisis leads to some new practices. And interestingly, I was told that the income tax that we all pay was the result of World War II. It was really meant as a short-term measure, but continued to stay on forever. So, and again, my focus is going to be so between 2003 and 2008, we had an energy crisis, and people are aware of what happened then. The huge increase in oil prices and the demand it had on this particular industry, the automotive industry, and the resulting response that Toyota had and how they dealt with it. Now, just to clarify, between 2003 and 2007 were some of the most profitable years for Toyota. But the recession caught up with them in 2008, and they had probably close to $2 billion by way of loss. So it's not to say that Toyota was not touched by it. Toyota was definitely touched. They saw the sales revenue drop by about 33% as a result of that shrinking market. Now, here's what happens generally. What is the usual and predictable response when sales falls and when your market shrinks? The predictable response is you have executives losing their job. There are changes to leadership. There are layoffs. You reduce your production capacity. You close down factories. Typically you have assets being sold in order to generate cash. So these are some of the things you see. And so I want to start by saying most of these things most of these things were not done by Toyota. So what we see in that period in 2008, when they were hit by the recession, as hard as they were, they did not change their leadership. They didn't lay off people. They temporarily altered some production lines. So we know that, for example, the Texas, the Tundra production on their Texas factory was shut down for a while. And we also know that their Highlander and Highlander hybrid production was stalled for some time in Indiana, in their Indiana plant. So we do have some of those stoppages. But that being said, people continue to come to work. So really, the reflection and inquiry for us is, what were they trying to do different from everybody else? Everybody else went a certain path, and you found them going down a different path. So that's a good reflection and inquiry to consider. And of course, they didn't really sell. We don't know in great detail, but most of their assets continued to operate. They didn't sell any of their assets as we know it. Their supplier relationships were much stronger after they came out of that recession. So that's the interesting keynote on which I wanted to start off. And perhaps I'll at this stage turn it over to you, Máiréad, to further probe the subject or to lead us down the discussion.
Thanks. And I had myself unmuted there. Apologies just for the delay. Absolutely. Well, I think what we'd like to we'd like to dig deeper into would be, I suppose, were there specific tools, were there specific ways that things that they took on, things that they didn't take on? You said they didn't sell any of their assets, but what were there ways that they specifically went forward to respond to the crisis at the time?
So some of the specific ways that they responded to the crisis clearly. So let me give you a specific example. When they shut, in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, between September to November, in that period of time, they shut down their Indiana plant. However, all the workers went into work. And what it then did was they resurrected, or in fact, I mean, I shouldn't say resurrected, because that is their practice. They started this practice of quality circles. So these quality circles, we know them as small group improvement, or if I may use the Japanese word kaizen, because being a lean forum, everybody is familiar with that word. They started to do small team or small group kaizen. And just on one production line, they saved about $2 million. That was one thing that happened from the small group kaizen. The other thing that happened that was even better on the Indiana, in the Indiana plant, was they were experiencing 150 defects per 100 vehicles. And you know, it's hard to say whether that was good, but being Toyota, that probably was good. It wasn't too bad. But once they started to, they had all the workforce coming into the production plant. They were not doing any production, so that gave them an opportunity to experiment. That gave them an opportunity to use that production line for their tri-storming, which is the word that we often use, which is very, you know, it's a very popular word in lean thinking. We say tri-storming. So what they did was they went from 150 defects per 100 vehicles to 30 defects per 100 vehicles. Now think about think about the impact of that. So if you reduced your defects by that percentage, so I'm trying to do math in my head, from 150 to 30 defects for every 100 vehicles, and given the volume of vehicles they produce. So I think there are two things that characterize that response. One is, what is the new vision? So they set a new vision. They used their Hoshin Kanri at that stage across the whole Toyota enterprise. They set a new vision, which said, given the circumstances, let's be agile, let's be adaptable. Let us change the way we operate based upon what's going on in the industry and what's going on in society. So they had a new vision. They in fact crafted a new vision 2020 in that very exact period. And it's so interesting that they did it, because they could do a beautiful environment scan that captured the essence of the new circumstances. And as a result of that environment scan, they had a new direction, and that was reflected in the way they did things at the workplace. So rather than laying off people, they saw them as an asset. They saw them as, they said, let's be positive, let's be affirmative. Things are going to come back. We don't know how long it's going to take, but let's do everything to sustain, maintain, grow, to change, to develop. So I think there was that spirit, and really they made it happen. So
Anand, can I just pick you up on a point there? I'm not sure if anybody else's connection was coming in or out, but just to clarify, you had said they went from 150 defects per vehicle down to 30 defects. Is that correct?
3 months.
In 3 months. That's incredible. You know, and just to summarize what you were saying there, you were saying that through small group of Kaizen, they reduced the number of their defects. They became more agile, and they created a new vision for the future in terms of how they went forward. We just have a question there from Jim Mackesy, one of our members. Jim is wondering, what type of changes were they looking at? What types of defects? I'm sure this is what his question is. It's what type of changes gave them the $2 million worth of savings on the line?
Yeah, no, so the $2 million savings on the line is a different one from the defects.
Okay.
So those are two different, yeah.
Can you?
I don't know what constituted the 2 million, which came from the small group Kaizen, but the defects reduction was a different, it was completely a different focus. But it used the same Kaizens to accomplish both of it.
Okay, that's brilliant. We have a question here from Karen Boyle. How would we approach Kaizen in social distancing? She's tried online, but it's challenging. And would you have any ideas? I suppose, Karen, that's probably a question we might bring up in a little while. And Joe, you might come in on that there in a few minutes. I just want to sort of continue exploring what Toyota did at this point. And were there other things other than the Kaizen that became agile and seeing the vision? I know that's a lot, but were there other tools that they used at the time to progress things forward?
Right, yeah. So definitely training was it. So do you want me to answer the first question, Máiréad?
Yes, please. No, I'll come back to the first question, which is
okay.
About the social distancing and doing Kaizen. The other question is, were there other tools that Toyota used other than the Kaizen to be able to propel themselves forward?
Yeah, so definitely one of the tools. So I'm going to list some of the tools they used. So the first and foremost and most important tool was the 2020 vision. So as soon as they went into this, as soon as they announced these losses, as soon as they sort of grasped the situation at the end of 2008, they immediately launched the 2020 vision. So they plunged into it. They were very affirmative, and a key part of that vision was we've got to be industry focused. So if there are things that are changing in our industry, let's adapt to it. Let's also adapt to society. So they had a more transcendent vision. So if society is changing, if their expectations are changing, if being environmentally conscious was the new norm, then therefore Toyota needs to change. We need to make some changes. So there was a Hoshin Kanri that happened straight away in 2010. That was one. Then they had the small group Kaizen, which empowered individuals in small teams to make changes. Then they had the regular Kaizen, which was all about price storming and experimenting on the production line. Then fourthly, they had a lot of focus on the Toyota production system and the Toyota way, if I may put it, and training on the Toyota way. So they found themselves, they took stock of their competencies. They realized that a large number of the supervisory staff were not very strong in the Toyota way. So they managed to eliminate that gap in competencies. So there was that entire incredible focus on the Toyota way, the Toyota production system, and the Toyota's body of practices, if I'm put it that way. There were those two aspects that they focused on. So these were some of the tools that they used. In terms of payroll, they did have a very layered, like the supervisors took a 10% cut, managers took a 20% cut, their executives took a 30% cut. So they had some kind of cost cutting, and I must admit, the truth is they did cut some of the executive salaries for sure, but there were no layoffs. They reduced their overtime. They reduced their production capacity to 70%. They were operating at 70% capacity, but targeted very high levels of efficiency from that 70% capacity, which I find rather interesting. So these were some of the tools that were used.
Yeah, no, and that is wonderful. Thank you, and of how you've given us a great overview of what they've done. Can you tell me the parallels that you would draw between that crisis and the current crisis that we have, the current pandemic? I suppose what are the differences that you would see between them, and what are the parallels you would see between the two of them also?
Right. So the big differences I would see is we now have to be physically distanced, right? So that is definitely a reality. At least in the short term, we have to be physically distanced. There is the lockdown, which poses somewhat of an existential threat, perhaps more pronounced than what we saw at that time. So these are the differences. So in terms of, perhaps this is a good segue into the first question, Máiréad, I don't remember who asked that question, but on the question of how do you do Kaizen in this situation, right? So here's the thing, there were 2 Kaizens that were conducted recently with some of our clients. One was specifically on a construction site, and it had to do with driving pipes. I don't know how many of you are aware of what piles are. These piles are driven into the ground in order to build on top of it. So this is what you would do in order to shore up your, to strengthen your earth so that you can build on top. So the client was driving very, very large steel pipes into the ground. Now, in this situation, it was not too difficult to physically distance and do a Kaizen because it was possible to do it. The work is very distributed over a large site with these big rigs that drive these piles. So it was possible to do a Kaizen under the circumstance, being physically distanced. Now, the client also had another situation where they were doing Kaizen on a supply chain. And this entailed people from India, from Manila, from China, Houston, Calgary, that's where I work out of, Calgary, and Amsterdam, all being involved in a Kaizen event. So how does that work in a practical sense? I think it's important for you to create templates beforehand. So if you're doing cross-functional swim lane mapping, keep that template ready. Do not forget the principle that it's one of the team members that should do it and not the lean coach. So as a consultant, you don't want to lay hands on the swim lane map and do everything because that will disengage them. So make sure that 1 or 2 members of the team are well prepared with a Visio swim lane map so that they can do the mapping on it. If you're drawing a transportation diagram, have a template ready for the transportation diagram. You have your all your continents there on the PowerPoint. If you're using a PowerPoint, then you have your arrows to show the shipment. Then make sure that then the team then fills in the details, right? So having a transportation diagram, that's for your initial diagnosis. Having a cross-functional swim lane type of template set up, having a template for your root cause analysis set up, having Microsoft Notes or something for us to put post-its up there and to move these post-its around. These are templates that you can put in place. And don't forget the first principle, and I say this again and again, in the world of lean, never forget principles, even on a special occasion. So this may be a special occasion, but don't forget the principle that you want the team members to put pen to paper so that they're engaged and they buy into this whole problem solving process. right?
And you know, and just on that point, I'm just conscious of time to keep people, and it's come up a couple of times in the questions. So I suppose you spoke about Toyota having a new vision, and equally you've just spoken there about the importance of us to remember our principles and not to compromise these in this time, and to take people with us. But how do you how did Toyota, and how should we, you know, get everybody on board with this new vision? Is there ways you could recommend that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so let's look at kind of, I'm going to sort of approach this question in a slightly different way. So pardon me, and if I'm going off track, please, don't hold yourself back from correcting me. So you have a crisis. What helps you to take stock of your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats in this crisis? It's not people sitting together, you know, at the leadership level and saying, well, you know, so what I'm saying is you need to inject science into this environment scan. And the best science you can inject into it is a very structured step-by-step approach done in a short time. So you're really trying to do an environment scan, take stock of new opportunities. But most companies don't respond like that. There's a knee-jerk response. So when you look at what's happening in Canada, you find companies, the first thing they do is they're going, now a market has shrunk. We have a pandemic. They're not looking at diversifying their revenue. They're not looking at what new opportunities present themselves because of this crisis, right? So I'm saying the need, there's no greater need than in this point in time to come up with a new vision. I'm not saying this should take 6 months. I'm saying this should happen in the next 1 week, but it needs to happen with proper nemabashi, which is the Japanese word for consensus building. It should come from the lean principle of collective wisdom. And if this can happen very quickly and very fast, I think companies can retool. They can think about ways to deal with this crisis rather than use the traditional mindset that they've used, which a large number of companies in Canada are doing, except for perhaps some of, as Joe was mentioning, some of our clients who may be thinking differently because they've been programmed to think differently.
And that's a great way. I just wanted to come to you, Joe, and bring you in on that. In terms of this issue of onboarding, there's very significant change happening here. We see that Toyota navigated that significant change. They ended up recording a loss, I believe, in 2008, and then a record high of profitability in 2009. So obviously they had to bring their staff and their teams on board. So Joe, would you like to contribute on that point?
Yeah, I think obviously the start of that Global 2020 strategy had a number of different strands, Máiréad. But one particular strand was something that I think is very important in a crisis like this. Is one of the very first things that they did was they set up a cross-functional team to relook at their competitor landscape. And the reason why they relooked at their competitive landscape was they knew that some companies were in a much worse position than Toyota to get out of this crisis. And also they saw the situation that they could increase market share. And that's exactly what happened. So they spent 3 months with a cross-functional team purely analyzing, not just the Detroit 3, the Fords and the GMs in America, but they started to analyze all their competitors, and I mean, the proof is in the eating, as they say. The following year they came back into profit. So that was I suppose that was key from that perspective. The other key. So they had these 3 strategy workshops, but again they were led by the leaders. And I suppose you talk about a vision. The vision has to come from the leaders or the managers within the organization. So that the other key was the opportunity, and and I've actually talked to people in Enterprise Ireland in the last 2 weeks, and this comes up is the opportunity for collaboration and for partnering with other organizations or other like organizations. And what did Toyota do? They actually started collaborating with Tesla. I know that's no more now, but at that time they started collaborating with Tesla, and they started looking at environmental friendly cars and hybrid cars and so on. All of that from Toyota came out of the 2008 crisis. So, sorry.
No, and that's, and you know, that's everything we're hearing. Like we've done a number of these conversations over the last couple of weeks, and what we continue to hear is people maximizing the opportunity of this downtime, looking at ways to transform and I suppose you know, cocoon their businesses that we looked at last week, but equally, how do we cocoon it, how do we protect it, but how do we move forward in that? Joe, I just want to very quickly, I'm conscious of people's time, so if people need to go, I just want to thank you in advance for being with us. We're going to finish up in about 3 minutes. Joe, very quickly, if you have a brief answer to Karen's question of how would we approach Kaizen in social distancing? She's tried online, but it's challenging, and have you any ideas for her?
Yeah, we're actually, I suppose all I can say is, and Pat is specifically involved in this, we're actually running a number of Kaizen events at the moment virtually, and we're using Zoom, we're using Excel templates. There are specific online Excel templates that can be used for process mapping, which works very well. We also use electronic whiteboarding, and I suppose it's very, very important. I think the key to it is it's very structured. The Kaizen events are very, very structured. Everybody knows their accountability. There's visual management board set up for the duration of the Kaizen events, and they're reviewed on a daily basis. They're task driven, and if there are any particular issues that are not working in relation to the Kaizen event, they're called stuck issues, and then those stuck issues have to be highlighted and dealt with. So I think the key to it is the structuring and around, and the reporting and the measurement, and I suppose giving accountability to each of the people working on the Kaizen event. I mean, that's what we've done.
And Karen, if it's of any benefit, there's a Lean Business Ireland webinar happening next Thursday at 6:30, and the question is all around the title is, and the question is all around what are the smart people doing, and lean tools to catapult businesses out of this COVID-19 pandemic, and you know, the economic consequences of what is currently happening. So that's next Thursday at 6:30, and it's called What the Smart People Are Doing. And hopefully in that, I know we'll be discussing a number of tools that companies are using that may be helpful. Gentlemen, thank you both for your time. Thank you to our audience, to everybody who's been with us this afternoon. We are going to record this. We are going to put this online, and I will be sending it around. And thank you very much. And stay safe. And thanks, Joe. Stay safe and
thanks,
stay well.
Máiréad.
Thanks everybody, and be safe.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.